So we're done with the painting and the tank mounting. Now the next thing is a very interesting part, electronics and wiring. So what I'm going to do is start from the tail of the aircraft and move forward. So the first thing I want to mention here is the following. So the horizontal stab on this aircraft comes with 2 pins at the front. Those are these 2 guys right here. And you can detach the entire vertical stab. And the wires, the elevator wires, so there's 2 servos, 1 and 2. And here are the servos, 1 and 2. So these wires are designed to come out the bottom. So what I want is for these wires to come through the top. So I'm basically going to drill a hole through the top right here. And as you can see, there's lines here demarcating where the vertical stab sits. So all of this surface here is not going to be seen anyway. So I'm just going to drill that up top, get that connection to come out through here. Maybe a better solution is to put that hole in the front right here and to have a connection point for the elevator servos at this point. And that way we have one harness that splits into 2. There's a connection going up for the rudder and there's a connection going out here for the elevator servos, and that just looks so much cleaner than having these wires hanging down the bottom like that. Drilled a small opening through the front and then allowed me to drill a hole in here. There's a former that goes maybe like right around here, and I just drilled through that enough to get my servo wires through. And so now I think this is a much better and much cleaner solution. I can get these wires to be shorter and then they'll come and mate to a connector that comes out of right here. For the elevator harness, we're going to be using these AR connectors, and they're really nice because they come with this mounting plate and your servo extensions, so you can see that. So what I'm thinking is this guy is going to get mounted right in here, and on the stabulator horizontal stab you can see that you've got the mating connector, and that just plugs into the servo wire. So I'm going to tidy this up, put some snake skin over this because I want to protect these wires from chafing on the edges here. And then once that's done, we can move this in there and just, like, you know, it'll stay in there, and the owner can use that as they see fit to plug in. So I know I drilled right about the center, so lined up with the rudder servos connection there. So I'm just gonna line this up. Oops. Drill a relief hole, maybe right around there, so that these wires can pass through, and then we'll just screw the connector into this. There's a little bit of a bulkhead here, so that's great. Let's check the fit. You just need enough room. And it fits pretty good. Really nice fit. Just gotta screw those in, and that servo is gonna be done. And so now I'm just gonna mark my mounting holes. So we can kind of see those are the 2 spots where my mounting screws will go. We'll drill those and then we'll go from there. Yes, I didn't mention this before, that is why this hole is bigger, because it needs to go around this entire connector for perfect seal on here. So basically we're gonna plug this into here and then slot this entire stabulator in place. I have my kit of screws. I just got these from Amazon, and I'm going to be using the smallest ones that I have, which I think are 2.3 by 6. So what I'm going to do is stick those in, get the thread started on the wood on both sides. Then I'm going to put some CA so that we can preserve those threads, and then we can mount this connector right in its spot. So for this precision job, I'm going to use my epoxy with that nozzle so that I can get it exactly where I want. Not much, you don't need much, you just need enough to line those grooves. I'm going to wipe off the excess here. And that way, those threads are going to be nice and strong. Okay, so now let's mount our connector. Look at that. Nice clean finish. Let's see if we can focus that. There we go. And the wires will come down the bottom here. Let me see if I can zoom out and show that. Yeah. So the wires will come down the bottom here, and basically that's where my rod is gonna come through as well. So that's where it'll meet the rest of the harness. I'm gonna show like a mid-step point of what this is gonna look like. So basically what happens is we're gonna come in. Here's our tail surface. We're gonna hook this up just like that until that connector clicks. And then once that's done, all we need to do is just slide on in. And we are perfectly lined up. So you can see that seam is looking good, and all my connections are seated properly. Pull it off, you just nice tug, connections right there, and there's plenty of wire so that there's no risk of tugging the wires too hard. That's why I left the slack, and you can just unplug it and you're done. And like I always say, when I'm building jets, that's like my #1 concern. How is this thing gonna be serviced if it needs to? So all that's left is to put some snakeskin on here to prevent any chafing that might happen around here. So here's a snakeskin that I've applied. I will shortly apply shrink tube with adhesive lining to keep this in place. But what I want to show is that that snakeskin now protects this wire from the chafing in here. But also there is that harness bulkhead that we cut through, and I'm shining the light so that you can see that. That snake skin goes through that as well. So we shouldn't get any chafing on these elevator wires at all. And here's another tip. So shrink tube shrinks, but also it expands. So this doesn't quite fit, so I can take up my pliers and just gently expand it. Don't overdo it, because if you do, it'll tear apart. But if you just expand it gently on both sides like that, then it should fit right over. Boom. And then when you shrink this down, it'll work just like it was intended to. All done. So that's the final product. This will just slide in here and coil in as needed, and should be able to plug in to the fuselage section. So I've pulled out this connector and I have added some snakeskin to it, and that's in preparation for the second part of it that it's going to mate to, which is this guy, which is, as you can see, a pretty long harness to reach from the back all the way to the front of the jet. This is what's going to be in there, and then there's going to be a third piece of insulation, which is this material here, which is made of fiberglass that can't burn. Then I'm going to encase all of this and the rudder harness in as well. I gotta add these locking tabs just so I can be sure that these will never come apart in flight. So I'm just showing this now, but in order for this to fit in here I have to undo this, but these clips will go on and that will lock those connectors in place. Okay, so what I'm trying to show here is how the wiring for the elevator and rudder works. So you can see right there is where right underneath is where the snake skin for both the elevator wires, and those are currently held in place. The extensions are held in place with those servo connector holders there. Those are the blue guys, and all of that's gonna be encased in another thing of snake skin, which I'll show momentarily. But from the top, basically we have that connector. This is where your elevators plug in. This guy is where the rudder plugs in. Nice little plug. And then from the inside, those wires just come out to these two. Let's see if I can show them. You can see I use a hole in the bulkhead there to bring them forward. And so we're gonna run these all the way out to the... So the final piece of snake skin, which is the fire retardant stuff, is applied. So you can see we have snake skin over the rudder and snake skin over the two elevator servos. And finally, because this is gonna be next to the pipe, we have this fiberglass snake skin, and that's gonna be the third layer of protection. So here's the routing. So from the top, I'm gonna route through the under section, through the middle of the fuselage, and when we come to the front, I think I'm gonna install a clip right under here, and that clip is gonna hold these wires up and away from these gear door hinge points. So by securing this up here, it's gonna be clear, and that's gonna get run through the middle here and out to the front. So there she is. She's all glued in, and as always, this is what I use for stuff that I want to set quickly, stuff that doesn't need too much structural strength. E00NS air epoxy. I like this stuff because it's thick. It's thixotropic, which means it doesn't droop or smudge. Like, you put the epoxy and it sits there in spite of gravity and all of that. So we'll let that dry, we'll secure that harness and keep moving. I have finished the assembly of the horizontal stab, and now I'm gonna put this whole tail assembly together. So I made a little washer here just because I didn't want the pressure of that bolt all going onto a smaller spot on the composite here. So that washer, and I've cut it smaller so that the rest of the vertical stab kind of covers that in place. And we're gonna drop just a little bit of blue Loctite in here because there's a metal insert that this screws into, and we're gonna secure that down. Not too tight, just finger tight. It's perfect. Once that's done, you can do the top. So to secure the rudder internally in the jet, there are two spots. So you can see that's a set screw all the way on the left there that supports that carbon rod, which is inside an aluminum clip. So that's one. I believe that's an M4 hex screw, and then there's a second one on the top right here. So that spot is we're going to stick another M4 with the washer to actually secure the front part of the vertical fin to the fuselage. So that screw that secures the rudder's vertical stabilizer / rod is secured in place, and through this carbon rod in here there's a path that leads to the outside where you can access the M4 hex bolt, and then using that and a wrench on this side you can tighten that. So that's been tightened, and also I've added the M4 screw with a Loctite and washer to secure the vertical stab. So I'm happy with that. Tail section electronic wiring, looks like everything's good there. So we're gonna go move to the wings. Okay, so there's something I saw in this jet and the wiring that mortified me a little bit. So I'm going to zoom in here and I'll show you. So this is a wire that goes to the brake, and you can see that it looks like right in here like there was some heat or melting damage, and I was like, okay, but look what happens right next to it. This is a really terrible idea. Do not do this. So the previous owner decided that he was going to split the wire and then put a metal screw to secure both wires. So metal, this thing is metal, the landing gear is metal, which means it conducts, and you can see that. So when you make a connection like this, you're basically shorting the entire brake line altogether, and this is why this is not a surprise. And so if you look, that pattern continues all the way into here as well. Do not do this, guys. This is a terrible idea. I will be undoing this and replacing most of this wire. So there's a cover that was made that just has 4 screws. You pull that out and then you get access to the gear. And what the gear looks like is there's just 4 screws in there to mount the gear, and I'm gonna undo those 4 screws and get the gear out. And then once that's done, I'm gonna go ahead and replace, basically cut this wire off maybe somewhere around here and replace all of it anywhere that it's going through, you know, the screws like that, because that's just terrible. When it comes to routing this, I think I'm gonna route it a little bit differently, and I'll show what that means. So you can see that right now all of these wires get like clutched up on the front. Let me zoom in. So all of this wiring here gets just bundled up in this area, and I don't like that. And what that means is then you're susceptible to getting wires pinched when the gear. Show what I mean when I say that those wires get pinched. So I'm gonna actuate the gear and let's see what happens here. So you see how that wire is just asking to be squished as the gear goes down? We need to change that. What I like to do is route these and bring them out the back where the wire for the actual gear is. So the gear actuator, the wires for it are actually get routed from behind in here. So they go that way and then they go through holes in the framework and then come back forward. And I like that because that means that you're not gonna get pinched in here, and there's room in the back of the landing gear. So if you look at the gear, when the gear's up, you can see that there's room right here. Let's get around that cover. There's room right in here for the wire to go around, you know. So when the gear's up, you still have room to maneuver. So you're likely to not get stuff pinched if you go, you know, in the back area and bring the wire around this. Okay, so we're gonna replace this wire with some of this. Obviously I'll get rid of the orange, but we'll replace it with new twisted wires. I'm just gonna figure out the length of it. Alright, so let's replace this. Alright, so we're going to use some snake skin, and we're going to use this to cover both of these wires actually. So what I'm thinking is I'll do a little bit up to right around here, and then a second bit that covers this and this wire together. So that's why it's got to be in 2 bits. So here's kind of a little bit of the final product. So you can see I put heat shrink tubing all the way from the bottom, because this metal here is a chafing hazard, so you want to protect that. And then put snake skin all around, so the first bit ended here, and here's the second bit that encapsulates both the wire from the light and the brakes. And then because of that, let's see if I can zoom in here. Because of that, the wiring that is behind, that goes from the light to this harness here, was susceptible to chafing from sort of this heatsink here. And so what I did is I used some of this stuff. This is Tessa tape, and wrapped it around the wires, so you can see that black fabric cloth tape. So that's going to provide some chafing resistance when that wire, because this gear's going to come in and out, this is going to flop around like that. But because of that Tessa tape, you can see that on the front here too, that's going to provide some chafing resistance. The next thing I did was add a clip to hold the wire in the spot. And what I'm thinking now, I'm going to zoom out, is this is the landing gear wire, and I'm going to route this sort of up and around and in here. And from, like I said earlier, I know that there's going to be room, because the gear mount sits a little bit like that. So there's room in here in the plane to slip this wire and follow the same path that the landing gear wire goes. And then second thing is, because of that, this is going to have some slack, and when the gear is retracted like in this position, that's when it's going to be at its longest. And then when the gear sort of folds up, this wire is going to just slide in. If you believe the wing is here, if you assume the wing is here, this whole thing is rigid enough to just slide in to the wing. And then that glob mess of wires that was sitting in here goes away, and we just have that. Alright, so right now what I'm doing is working on the wing harness, and I think what we're going to do is use these Buma RC BRC 775 for the landing gear brakes and flap and aileron servos. So that's about 10 connections. We have about 14 here, so 4 of them will be empty, and that's okay. And then for the lights, which is about 6 connections, we're gonna use the AR again. Let's see. We're gonna use these guys from AR. This is what we used on the tail surface for the elevators. So that's 6 connections, and that should be enough. So this is the BRC 774, and that should be enough to hold the 6 wires that do all the lighting. So this is the landing gear light, and then there is 2 other LEDs on the wing pods. Here's the tool that I use. If you've seen previous videos, you'll see that I have mentioned where I got this stuff at. So there's aileron servo. Let's add the servo connector onto it. Black, red, finally signal. Okay, so I'm not going to show the rest of this on camera. So that's the aileron, it's done. Next I'll do the flap, then I will do the landing gear, and then I'll do the brakes. Alright, so I have finished the wiring on one wing, and I think I like how this came out, so I'm going to show you. So on the landing gear, this is what wound up being encased. One wire encased in snakeskin or expandable sleeving, going all the way to the brakes. And you can see that I use this tape. It adheres to itself, it doesn't have any glue, and that secures that wire in place right here, here, and then a clip on that spot. And then routed those under the skin of the aircraft and then back out, and then those came out to these 2 connectors. So I showed you what these are before. This connector is going to be the primary flight control surfaces, brakes and gear, and then this is going to be all the lights. And that's how I like to keep my wiring. Very simple, very clean, and you can't, you know, dummy proof sort of, because you can't plug these in the wrong way. And then you just, you know, stow it in. Once your wing is in place, push it, and that's that. So let's see the final gear wiring in action. So you can see how this is all clean, no wiring mess anywhere, and we're done. And then I'll show where this wiring slides into next. Gear down, and then you can look right in here to see where that wiring goes away at. So you can see that wiring really nicely tucked in there, and it goes away nicely, and this is what it looks like. So that's where the wiring goes. Gears coming up, or going down, I guess. Look at how that wiring just slides in there for a nice, clean, no pinch, no bind finish. If you zoom in here, you can see those AR connectors that mate to the ones on the wing. They have been screwed onto the fuselage, and that's looking good. And here are the mating connectors. So the top one is control surfaces and gear, and the bottom one is lights. All you have to do is plug in the bottom, just like that. And I heard the positive click. Plug in the top. So the wing is installed in place, and then we just shove it in, and you're done. And that's the wing connection. And we have a guest appearance. Hi Dylan, you want to say some few words? Hello. Hello.
fearless.
What is this called?
Airplane.
Airplane. Good job.
So here you can see what the gear is gonna look like. Much cleaner. As I showed before, just a single snake-skinned wire routed from the bottom to the top. So I really like that. I really like the look of that. Much cleaner than before.